Howdy folks, this is Big Sam. Today we're going to be taking a look at how to buy your first Mosin Nagant in 2021. Now this isn't going to be a complete overview of every Mosin Nagant model and submodel because, well, quite frankly, we'd be here talking until the end of time, and I don't really want to bore you. And that's not really the goal of this video. The goal of this video is to help you understand what to look for and what's good and what's bad, and some tips and tricks when you're considering purchasing your very first Mosin Nagant. All right? And now, we're not going to be talking about prices specifically today because, you know, prices can vary, right? So you may be watching this video 5 years from now, and if I talk about prices, they're going to be totally useless, or totally meaningless. The other thing is it depends on the market. So here in America, prices of these guns are going to be different than, let's say, in Canada, or wherever else they're legal than where you may be considering purchasing one, right? It's all about the market. It's all about supply and demand. So a really rare Mosin Nagant in America may not be worth as much in a different country because it's more available, right? So we're not going to get into too much detail about prices. Now, one caveat there is if you're looking at a Mosin and you want to know if it's a good price or really anything about it in general, please don't hesitate to send me an email. My email's in the description. Feel free to attach any pictures you want. You know, you could just say something like, hey, Big Sam, I found this rifle at my local pawn shop and it's, you know, $500. Do you think that's a good price? That kind of a thing. So I'm happy to answer, do my best to answer any questions y'all have, so never hesitate to reach out to me with any questions. So let's get into the video. I want to give a shout out to one of our viewers, Salem1104 Inc., for giving us the idea of this video. He's about to turn 18, which is cool here in America because once you turn 18, you can legally purchase rifles. So he's thinking about purchasing his first Mosin, and he wanted to know what are some things I should look for. So going from right to left, I've kind of got it ordered, at least for here in America, what Mosins you're most likely to encounter in the wild. Again, this could be a little bit different if you're in a different country, but for the most part, this is also based on things like production numbers as well. So it could vary a little bit depending on where you are, but there's going to be a lot of carryover in different market segments around the world, I think. So we're going to talk about what we have here, and then we're going to go into each one individually. So these three here on the right are going to be your standard refurbished 9130 rifles, okay? They made millions and millions of these guns. By far, these are the most common Mosin Nagants you will see. If you go to somewhere that sells guns and they have a Mosin, chances are it's probably going to be one of these, okay? So next over here, this atrocity is also a 9130 rifle, but some people will call this, it's been sporterized. Some people will say Bubba got a hold of it. Some people might even say Big Sam got a hold of it, which is obviously the case here. We'll look at this one. This is an interesting rifle. These are fairly common here in America. A lot of people did this to rifles back when they were like $100. So, you know, for those people that don't really understand what $100 is, you know, like 10 or 15 years ago, let's say 2005, you could get one of these for $100, which was like really, really cheap. You couldn't really buy too many other guns for that kind of money. And it was a lot cheaper than getting like a brand new bolt action. So, you know, a lot of people made fun of people back in the day for buying Mosins because they said, oh, that's a garbage rod or that's a poor man's gun. Well, the prices are going way up because people are realizing these are actually really historically significant rifles, and they're quite cool. But back in the day, this rifle was $100, and to put this in perspective, today this stock that it's in, this Archangel stock, brand new, retails for $150. So the stock actually was worth more than the rifle originally was, which is kind of funny. So people did funny things like this, and they put fancy bipods. There's a muzzle brake on it and a rail. Really interesting gun. We'll look at that more later. Here we've got a M44. So this is going to be a carbine, and you'll see tons of these. These are pretty common here. Depending on where you go, you may see more M44s and Archangel or Sporterized Mosins. It really just depends on where you're at. But you'll see a lot of these too. They made millions of these guns, and there's different types. There's Russian M44s, Chinese M44s, Polish M44s, Hungarian M44s. There's tons. But for simplicity's sake, I'm kind of bundling all into one variant so that you can be aware of it. And the easiest way to tell is that you can see this big bayonet right here. We're going to look at this more later. Next to it is probably the longest gun here. I don't know if it's quite as long as this abomination, but it's really long. This is an M91 rifle. This is the original variant of the Mosin Nagant from World War I. Okay, so these guys over here, and this guy are really from World War II and then later. Some of these were made pre-war, but these are all made post-World War I. This guy was made decades before World War I even, right? The Mosin Nagant was adopted in 1891, really. So, yeah, I mean, it's like 25 years oldish by the time World War I comes around, right? So, quite an ancient gun. These tend to be a little bit more rare. I don't see as many of these. When you see one of these, you always want to look at it, because you never know. There's just a million different things that can make this worth a little bit of money or just a ton of money. And the only way to tell is to look at it, right? And I've got some videos on M91s. We'll be doing more in the future because there's so many variants of this. It's a really interesting gun. If you ever see one, though, you definitely want to look at it. Next to it, this guy right here is also a 9130 rifle. This one's a little bit more interesting, though. This is actually a non-refurbished one, right? So almost all of them are refurbished here. This one's not refurbished. We're going to take a look at why, because there's a really interesting reason why this is not refurbished, and this gun has a really interesting story. So we'll look at that. Not nearly as common, though. You don't see a lot of non-refurbished 9130s. Over here is an M39 Finnish rifle. So this is what Finland adopted and used. Really, it probably saw a little bit of service during the Winter War, but mainly this was used during the continuation and the Lapland Wars from 1941 to 1944. These are amazing guns. These are one of the most accurate military surplus rifles you can get, and they are extremely desirable. At least here in America they are. I know these are really prized in Finland as well, but Americans are really starting to understand how nice these guns are, and the prices are really going up. Next over here, we've got another carbine. This is a 91/59 carbine. This is kind of a rare-ish rifle. I was going to say ish because I hear a lot of people refer to Mosins as rare. Oh, this is a rare Mosin. I will almost never refer to a Mosin as rare because, you know, rare can kind of be arbitrary, but to me, it's actually sort of an absolute thing, right? So it's rare could be a lot of things to a lot of people, but to me personally, there are very few Mosins I would say are rare. You know, if they made like 80 variants or 300 variants, I would say, yes, that's rare. But, you know, if they made millions, most of these guns they made millions of, or thousands and thousands of, even thousands and thousands of, it's not that much, but at the same time, it's there's a lot more guns out there that are much rarer, so it really depends on how you're looking at it. Technically, though, I don't consider really any of these guns here as rare. Some of them are pretty uncommon, especially these guys right here. But yeah, it's very uncommon to see a 9159. However, people do find these sometimes at like pawn shops. There's a lot more variants I don't have here. and we could spend all day looking at all the different variants. However, I tried to hobble together, you know, all of the different variants that you're probably most likely to see at like a pawn shop or a gun store or something like that. Now, some people may be asking why there's no M38 in here. I'm trying to keep this video as simple as possible. For those who don't know what an M38 is, it's basically this gun without a bayonet. It's just the predecessor to this gun. And when we look into this gun a little bit more, we'll see the differences in what to look for between an M38 and an M44. Okay, so a lot of people just stop watching this video now, but we're going to start getting into more what to look for things in each one of these guns, and some things that I will say, if the gun is like this, I would buy it. If it's has this or it's in this condition, I wouldn't buy it. So things like that. So let's get started. We're going to take a look at these guys on the right here. All right. So we have 3 guns here, and they may look the same, but they're actually all quite different. So the one on the bottom here, this is actually the very first Mosin Nagant I acquired. So in a lot of ways, that might help you figure out what Mosin you should buy. Now, one of the reasons I bought this rifle is because it was very cheap. Here in America, we have a kind of like an outdoor store called Carbines, and they're cool because they sell a lot of outdoor stuff, but a lot of times they have surplus rifles like these. And I had a Carbines credit card at the time, and I had a bunch of points. So this gun was actually on sale because of its stock, and coupled with the points I had, this was a very well-priced gun that I couldn't say no to. And this is kind of what started the Mosin virus. So let's look at this a little bit more. Now, I mentioned it had a crack in the stock. It's actually not really. So a lot of these are made with 2-piece stocks. See, this is a very like symmetrical crack. So this isn't a crack. This is just the stock was made in 2 pieces, and the bottom piece is separating. I've shot this gun, and you can kind of see it in there. I've shot this gun, and it doesn't matter, right? It's not like gonna fall off on me, and if it is, I could just repair it or buy a new stock. That's the nice thing about 9130s, especially refurbished ones. If you need a new stock, they're getting more expensive, but they're readily available. If you go on a place like eBay, you can find many of these no problem. So that's one of the nice things about this gun is just parts in general. Now, in general, the parts like the bolts and the magazines and triggers, they're all interchangeable almost entirely, in fact. But the stocks tend to be very different, and you know, some are worth a lot more than others. But a really basic one like this one is not, you know, super rare or super expensive, which is nice. So I don't care about this. Now, if you care about this kind of thing, you know, obviously don't buy this, right? So you may be you may want a really nice looking stock, and that you may have to pay a little bit more money for. Like this one's a laminated stock, so it's actually a bunch of sheets of plywood that are all kind of spliced together. Really beautiful. A laminated M9130 stock is a lot more uncommon, so these tend to be a little bit more money. I don't see too many of these. So again, it just kind of comes down to personal preference with things like this. Now, if it was a really horrible crack, and let's say the stock was a 1-piece and it had this horrible crack here, you know, it comes down to price for me. Like if the gun was really cheap, you know, I wouldn't mind it, right? If it's a good deal, because one of the nice things, if you don't have a lot of money, maybe this is the only Mosin you can afford, that's fine. Because you can just buy this, and then, you know, later when you have money to change out the stock, you can do that, and you can do whatever you want to it. So it really comes down to what your budget looks like. But personally, I don't have a problem with this, so that's one of the reasons I bought this. Now, one of the other things to look for with a Mosin is, as far as cracks go, is right here what's called a wrist crack. So one of the most common places for Mosin stocks to crack are going to be along here. And it's it's pretty easy to see, but you want to look at it up close, and it can happen on either side. And generally what causes that is these action screws are not very tight. And so there's one action screw here, and there's another one right here. If these aren't tight, the whole gun can actually move around and shake inside the stock, okay? And that's not really good, because if you shoot that, what actually happens is it's sort of like the 1-inch punch from Kill Bill, if you've ever seen that, or the way I don't watch Kill Bill, I just saw that in a Mythbusters TV show episode, which is interesting because the idea of the 1-inch punch, right, is, let's say you have a wall. So if I've got my hand flush against a wall, right, and I'm pushing it, I'm not going to hurt the wall at all by doing this, right? So imagine my fist is the gun and the wall is the stock. They're tight together, so nothing's going to really happen. But let's say the screws aren't really tight, like this, and maybe there's a little bit of a gap here. So as I'm shooting, we'll see, now I'm actually hitting the wall. If I do this enough times, I'm probably going to end up breaking this wall at some point. So that's what's going to happen here with your stock as well. So that's one of the things to look for. I generally, again, this is personal preference, I generally will not buy a Mosin if it has a wrist crack, because that basically means you need to replace the stock. It doesn't matter as much if it's on a 9130 like this, again, because the stocks are available. If you have a wrist crack on something like that guy, which he actually does, we'll look at it, and this is ironic, I still bought that. Now, I couldn't really tell from the picture when I bought that gun and had it. However, that one is interesting because I still would buy that because it's so uncommon. But most of the time on like an M91 stock is really hard to find. Or maybe like an M39 or your 9159. You know, some of these stocks can be really hard to find. So if they have a wrist crack, you know, you may just want to wait, because chances are the seller may not even realize that's an issue, and I would just wait, because you can probably end up getting another one that doesn't have a wrist crack for maybe the same or even less money if you look long enough. So a wrist crack is kind of a big ticket item for me. I would look at that. Okay, so we're going to look up here. Another thing I tend to look for, and I haven't cleared these, so I'm not going to stand in front of the muzzles, but another thing to look for is what is known as the term called counterbore. So this has to do with the muzzle diameter. So we're going to look at the muzzle diameters. So see, this one and this one are tight. You see this one? It looks like the muzzle diameter on this one looks a lot wider than, say, this one. See that? That's because this guy on the right here is counterbored, and these two are not. So what does counterbored mean? Well, we could do a whole video on this, and I probably will, but basically what happens is if a rifle's been shot or well used a lot, the rifling here at the bore will be very worn. And so to improve accuracy, they'll basically just drill out the first, like, up to about 4.5 centimeters you'll see, because 4.5 centimeters was the maximum amount that the Soviet army allowed rifles to be counterbored. Now, the Finnish army was a little more lenient. They would actually go further than that. But so basically up until here on this rifle, there is no rifling here. It's just like, it'll look like a smooth bore, but it's really not, because it's wider than the diameter of the rifling, so the bullet won't actually be touching this whole part of the bore. So generally, if a counterbored rifle is worth less, but it really depends on what you want. I don't have a problem buying a counterbored rifle. This one actually is really cool, because, and we'll look at it a little bit more here in a second, but getting back to counterboard in general, it depends on what you want. If you want a gun that's going to shoot the tightest groups possible, well, first thing is probably shouldn't buy a Mosin in general. You know, these the accuracy is fine on these. You can do a lot to improve accuracy, but if you want to shoot uber tight groups, I would buy a brand new, really nice performance bolt action rifle. If you really want a Mosin, but you want to shoot at like 800-yard groups or something like that, buy a M39. That's one of the most accurate rifles you can get, and we'll look at that more here. But some people really criticize these for inaccuracy with like being counterbored, but I don't really care. I guarantee you can have counterboard rifles that are really accurized in the Stockwell. They can be more accurate than unaccurized rifles that aren't counterbored. Every gun's different. I actually like counterboard rifles because if you think about it, they had to do this because it was worn. Well, why was this worn? Because this was well used. A lot of these guns that look brand new really didn't see much combat, potentially. And the thing with Mosins is their charm is their historical value and the horrible places that these rifles had to go to. That's why these rifles are so cool now. If you've got a counterboard Mosin, right, that's really cool because that means this gun, somebody like went to war with this. This was somebody's last line of defense against, death from the Nazis, right? So to me, if it's counterboard, I actually think that's kind of cool. Now, granted, not everyone thinks the same way, and that's one of the reasons counterboard rifles tend to be a little bit cheaper, but the prices of these right now are kind of crazy here in the US, so you can see counterboard rifles sell for much more than uncounterboard rifles on different days of the week. It's weird. Okay, so it's just one other thing to look for. So some people really care about it, some people don't. It just kind of boils down to what you want, what you're looking for. The next thing we're going to look at for the 9130 rifle is we're going to see if it's an X sniper. Okay, now we're going to do a whole video on ways to tell this without having to like open up the bolt. But the easiest way is to just open up the bolt. All right, so on this guy, this is the first Mosin I bought. This is a pretty standard Mosin, right? So see this channel here? There's no holes in it. It's nice, right? There's just nothing there, okay? This is generally what you'll see on almost all 9130 rifles, or all Mosins, really, okay? So open up your bolt channel, right, and just take a look in here. And I'll show you why you want to do this. So up here with this nice laminated stock guy, I'm going to open up the bolt here. Look at that. That's different. So you see these two plugged holes right here. This guy and that guy. Those are there because this guy used to be a PU sniper rifle. And that's really cool. So these used to be pretty cheap. You could kind of pick these up for the same price as standard 9130s. At least here in America, these tend to be a little more valuable. I would say the prices right now, they're like 50% higher than something like your standard 9130. The cool thing is, I recently picked this guy up at an auction for really cheap. Really good price. Even like, it would have been a good price if it was a normal Mosin. And I actually, it was an online auction, so I couldn't actually see this, but I was able to tell from the markings here on the barrel shank that this was, in fact, and the serial number, but again, we're going to get into that in a different video, that this was an X sniper. So sometimes people are sleeping, and especially when you're at like a gun store or a pawn shop, right? Where maybe just people don't know exactly what they have, this is something to look for. If you see that, and the rifle's not like crazy overpriced, go for it. This is really cool. And these are going to become more collectible in the future. So that's another cool thing to look out for. Is it an X sniper? Now there's another way to tell if it's an X sniper, if it's an older one like we have here. Remember this old Warhorse that has the counterboard muzzle? This guy's an X sniper. but this one's a little different. See, this guy has a hex receiver, okay? Now, some people really care about, ooh, it's a hex receiver. That's worth a lot more money and more desirable. Personally, I see that, and again, this kind of comes down to what you're looking for. These guns tend to be nicer if it has a hex receiver than the round receivers. I actually like the guns made during the war. So all of these are pre-war. So this one's a 1942. One of the reasons I like the wartime ones is they have this really rough finish to them, right? They look really crude, and to me that's actually appealing because every one of these is a little bit different. Whereas these, they're all nicer, they're more uniform, they probably have smoother bolts, a lot of them. Not all of them, especially the refurbished ones, but as a general rule of thumb, these tend to be a little bit nicer. Would I pay a lot more for just a normal run-of-the-mill hex receiver than a round receiver? Probably not, but again, some people will. So it really comes down to what you want. Do you want a really nice pre-war Mosin, or do you want one that was made, during the heat of the war where everything was on the line for humanity and civilization? That's kind of in the camp I'm in. But this one's really cool because this is also an ex-sniper. Except this is much older. If we look at this guy, he's actually a 1935. And notice, you open the bolt channel, right? It looks like the first one we looked at. So that's exciting, but it doesn't look like it's an ex-sniper. Well, that's because this is not a PU sniper. This was a PE sniper. This was the very first original sniper rifle that the Mosin Nagant was configured for. And we can tell it's an ex-sniper because you can see these welded holes in here. It looks really kind of horrible, right? They literally filled in the holes and welded them and ground on it, right? But that's actually really cool. I don't see many PE snipers, and again, this is one of the reasons I love this gun, is just because you can just imagine the places this thing's been. This was probably used as a sniper rifle, and it probably picked off many Nazis in its day. So this gun has a really rich history to it. Again, if you want like the tightest groups, this is not the gun to buy. But if you want something that's just really historically neat, and you can still shoot, I don't have any problem going out and shooting this gun. It's still a great shooter, but, it still has that historical coolness to it. So that's one of the reasons I really like these. Okay, so again, there's our 9130 rifles. So let's get to now this abomination, the Archangel Mosin. We're not going to spend a ton of time on this, but some of the things to look for. This has got a detachable magazine, excuse me. This is a 10-round magazine, single stack. Okay. Pretty common here. These are nice because these are actually it's polymer reinforced, or I guess carbon fiber reinforced polymer. There's actually carbon fiber in the stock, and it's actually pillar bedded from the factory, this stock is. So one of the interesting things with Mosins is, let's say I buy one of this, but I want to shoot even tighter groups with it. You can put it in an Archangel stock. This is totally reversible. I can go and just remove the stock, take out these two action screws, put the old stock on it. So a lot of people will make fun of you if you use one of these things. I don't care. It's totally reversible. You're not permanently modifying the gun by putting this on, and it's kind of cool, right? It's not for everybody. Some people throw up when they see something like this. Some people think, oh, this is cool. Again, this just depends on what you're looking for. Whenever you see a Sporterized Mosin, though, especially if like a pawn shop, use it to your advantage. Try to talk them down on the price, right? Even if you don't care or you like it, say, this gun, somebody ruined this gun. I don't think I'd pay more than X amount for it. You guys got to come down on your price a little bit. Because, I want, people want, you can tell them, people want it to be original and someone ruined it, right? Maybe maybe they'll work with you on the price, right? But there's little things to look for like that, or maybe this crack where you can try to help negotiate a little bit better price for you. Sometimes you'll also see this. This is an Ames rail. Ames Sports, AIMS Sports makes this rail. This is cool because you just pop out this pin. You can take the rear sight off and replace this here. This is also reversible, although sometimes the rear sight springs are soldered on. So sometimes if you want to take it out, it's a pain. You don't have to resolder it if you want to put it back in, though. So like I could easily take this out and convert it to this. So again, this is not permanently modifying the gun, so I don't have a problem with this. Then there's this horrible muzzle brake. This is nice because it actually slides all over the front sight, which, well, the base, right? So the base is like part of the barrel. Just slides on, and then it has a couple of these set screws. This is a Texas Precision muzzle brake. This is a pretty nice muzzle brake. This is really properly machined from aluminum, I believe. Yeah, really nice. Again, some people throw up when they see things like this. I don't care, because you could just take this off and you're back to your original configured gun. What I don't like is when someone permanently modifies a gun. Whenever you see a gun, especially one that looks like this, you want to look up here on top especially to see if anyone's drilled any holes. If somebody has drilled holes up here, just don't buy the gun. I would say that. Because what someone's done is they've drilled through the receiver to try to mount a scope. And you can't reverse that, right? To me, you've kind of ruined the gun in a lot of senses. You know, it's still shootable, it's still usable, but a lot of people really frown on that, myself included. So, like, if you're gonna, you know, just set it up like this, I don't care, because, again, it's totally reversible. But if somebody is, you know, drilled and tapped the receiver, just stay away, right? It's best to just stay away from that. Okay, so that's our Sporterized Mosin. Now next is our M44. So you see this guy's a lot shorter. This is kind of rarer to see. This is a really nice stock. This was actually made in Czechoslovakia. It's a very distinctive pattern of this stock. And we can see here that we have this cool bayonet folding assembly. Okay. Right, so we didn't see this on our other one. So this would be what we'd refer to as an M44. And again, there's a lot of different variants of this. Now, something to look out for here is sometimes people will remove the bayonet. So you'll see this kind of this protrusion here. There's a screw. We can look on the other side, see that screw. So maybe this screw's missing, but this whole protrusion is still there. Should you buy that gun? If it's a good price, you know, maybe if it has the original stock still, you can definitely buy it, because what you can do is just get a new bayonet and throw it on. And that's another nice thing. You can talk someone down on the price, and then when you have more money, you can buy the bayonet and put it on. So that's pretty nice. Now, an M38 looks pretty much the same as this gun, except it doesn't have a bayonet. So you can imagine this gun with no bayonet. I'm actually going to fold this. Give me 1 second here so I can show you what this looks like folded. It's hard to do that with 2 hands, unfortunately. All right, there we go. So we see that's folded. So over here, M44s will have this notch in the stock. So if you see an M38 with no bayonet assembly there, check to see if the stock has this notch. Most M38s will actually have this notch. They'll have M44s, M44 stocks. And that's just because a lot of them are refurbished post-war. They made millions and millions of M44s because the Army went from basically having the M38 carbine and the M9130 rifle to just having the M44. So a lot of existing M38s just got M44 stocks. If you're looking at an M38, which has the same rear sight, and it doesn't have this notch right here, that's definitely should tip you on the edge to buying that gun, because most of them have the notch. If it doesn't have this notch, if it looks instead just like this, where it's just flat here, that's a good indication you should buy that, because that's a much more uncommon stock to see on an M38. Okay, so that's our variants here. All right, so we're getting there. We're going to take a momentary break. Maybe you want to get some coffee or something, or maybe you want to rewind and go back to see something that we've already looked at here. This is a rather lengthy video, I realize. But in a second, we're going to next take a look at our M91. All right, welcome back. Hopefully you got yourself a cup of coffee. I'm a Aquafina man myself, personally, but that's okay. The next thing we're going to be taking a look at here is this M91 rifle. So up until now, we've been looking at World War II rifles. And this guy is quite a bit older. Again, this is like the original Mosin, the M91. So this guy would have seen service potentially in conflicts, starting from the Boxer Rebellion to definitely, now not a lot were used then, but could have been. Definitely could have seen service in the Russo-Japanese War and World War One. This one also could have seen service in, we don't know, but other places it could have been were things like the Russian Revolution, or especially, it definitely made it to Finland, and we'll look at that, and I can show you why. But this thing was basically used from the 1890s to really 1944. Up until 1944, Finland still had tons of guys using rifles just like this. This one, in fact, Finland used. So used for quite a long time. These have the richest history, I would argue, of any Mosin, because again, this thing just could have been to so many different countries in different times, in different places. Such an interesting history. So some things to look for is, right, we can see like this one's an antique. I would always check to see if the one you're looking at is an antique. See, this one's 1894. And now, an antique may mean different things to different people. Here in America, if a gun is made before 1899, so if it was in 1898 or before, it's considered an antique. And the reason that's significant is if it's an antique, it's treated as basically anything else. I think a lot of people won't sell these if you're under 18. You know, they want to make sure that, like, if you're buying online, they want to make sure they're not sending this to a 5-year-old child, again, because this is still a totally usable rifle that shoots modern ammunition. It's just ancient. It's really old. This one is 127 years old at the time of filming this video. 127 years old, right? I mean, that's almost as old as my parents are. That's crazy. Absolutely insane. And it's crazy that it can still shoot modern ammo. One of the interesting quirks of a Mosin is just how so old some of them are, and they still work just fine, right? These things are just built to last. So check to see if it's an antique. Now, sometimes, and this is another interesting thing, sometimes this is incorrect. So sometimes you can have a date here that'll say 1917, but the gun is still an antique. And so that's like a paradox. How can that be? Well, the interesting thing is this date is the date of the barrel. In America, and I don't know, your country could be like this, you have to look up your local laws. This part is the gun. This is the receiver. So this is the barrel. It threads into the receiver. This is not the gun, even though this is the part that's dated. So this date up here is actually irrelevant in determining whether or not it's an antique. Another quirk. A little known fact of Mosin Nagants is, you see this tang right here. So if you take the stock off, on the underside of this is dated with a date, a year, and the manufacturer generally. That is the date that determines whether or not the gun, at least in America, is an antique. So buying one of these, especially if it's from Finland, is always a gamble. Because Finland actually rebarreled a lot of these guns. So sometimes you'll see guns, and you know, my buddy in Texas has one that's one from the 1900s, but it's an antique because the receiver is from like 1898, which is hilarious, right? It's really funny. A lot of people don't believe it's an antique. You have to take the whole stock off, and it's kind of a hassle on these because these have these big old barrel bands. And this is actually a really easy way to tell if it's an M91. You have these big old barrel bands with these screws in them. And sometimes they're missing this top handguard. If you're looking at an M91 that's missing the top handguard, generally you don't want to buy it unless it's really cheap, because these handguards are very hard to get. For reference, this top handguard, this piece of wood here, this guy, costs as much right now in America as this whole Archangel stock does. It costs the same. Unfortunately, this is way harder to find. So like in America, if I was to try to buy one of these or replace it in one of these, I would have to get one from, you know, Estonia, or maybe someone in Finland has one. These are not very easy to come by. So yes, they're kind of expensive, but even so, more so than that, they're hard to get. So if you're looking at an M91 and it is missing a handguard, I would be leery, because it may take you quite a while to actually get one, or to bring yourself to actually pay the money that one costs. Now, I keep mentioning this gun's from Finland. The way we can tell that is if we flip it over, we see this SA marking. It's this SA in a box. See that right here? Where's my finger? I gotta find my finger first. There's my finger. Okay. See SA? So that means this gun is from Finland. This was a mark they started using in 1941. That just basically means property of the Finnish army. Okay. And you can see this on any sort of gun used by Finland. Finland used 9130s, M39s. You can see this on a lot of guns. But this is cool because this means that this gun was used in World War I and potentially before, all the way up until past 1941 in Finland. So what's amazing is when this gun came out in 1894, pretty much nobody had machine guns, right? A lot of people were still using black powder stuff in 1894 when this gun came out. This gun was still used in combat from that day, potentially against people that had black powder rifles, up against people that had T-34 tanks, okay? So that's how crazy this gun is, and the amount of conflict and just horrible things these had to go through. These things are just so cool. I highly recommend getting one of these if you can pick one up, if you can find one. And again, there's a ton of little nuances that can make this cool or valuable. Like this little thing here, if you see this magazine swivel, this is really rare. That's something else to look for. We're not going to cover all of that today because that's a whole series of videos in itself. But again, if you have one you're looking at and you want to know more about it, check to see if I have any videos on it, but always feel free to send me an email and ask me my opinion on it, because I'm more than happy to give you my opinion on it. Okay, so that's kind of a really brief overview of an M91 and something you may see. Now, this guy over here is we're going back to really just before World War II. This is a 9130 rifle, but this one's weird because it's not refurbished, right? This is an old Tula gun. We can see the star here. That's pretty cool. We can still see that. We can make out 1930 something. We can't quite make out that last digit. So what is this gun? Why is it non-refurbished? Because almost all of these guns were refurbished. Millions of these guns were refurbished. How did this one escape being refurbished? Well, let's look at the barrel here. So we can see this guy is a 1937 Tula. And that makes sense. Generally, when you find an unrefurbished 9130, it's going to be a 1936 or a 1937. Not always, but a lot of times it will be. Here's why. You can, let me flip this guy around so you can read that. You see this? So this says made in USSR. That's strange. Why does it say that? Well, this is another weird quirk about some Mosins, like this one. This gun was imported from Spain, of all places. So how did a Mosin get to Spain? Well, if you think about what was happening in Spain around this time, it was the Spanish Civil War with that wonderful dude, Francisco Franco. For those of you who are kind of familiar with the Spanish Civil War, he was, I think, basically the dictator of Spain, if you will, at the time. And the interesting thing about the Spanish Civil War, a lot of countries kind of saw this as a great way to test some of their weaponry. So places like the Soviet Union sent their weaponry over there, right? So that you get to help people that you sympathize with. And you also get to use it as kind of a proving grounds to test how good your weapons are. So that's sort of what happened here. This gun was actually used in the Spanish Civil War. It was never refurbished because, I mean, it actually may have been imported before the refurbishment happened. But this gun never went back to Russia, okay, to be refurbished by anyone there. Instead, we see this marking here, made in USSR. Sometimes it'll say URRS. I don't really know why. I don't think anyone really knows why, although some people have theories. What this means is it's really just an import marking. And when they imported this from Spain, the current law said that they had to stamp the country of origin. So they had to stamp the country the rifle was made in on the gun in order to import it. Very strange. But this is an easy way to tell if a rifle is made or was in the Spanish Civil War if you see this made in USSR on it. And you won't always see this just on Mosins either. You can even find Italian Vetterli Carcanos with this marking. So if you're not familiar with that, what that gun is, it's basically the original Italian Vetterli, which was a black powder rifle, a single-shot black powder rifle from like the 1870s, okay? And they then converted them to a magazine, and it was like in a 10 millimeter black powder cartridge, right? Well, then when World War I came around, they had to have rifles that they wanted to be able to reuse those rifles with their existing Carcano ammunition. So then they converted them into 6.5 Carcano, which basically by doing that, they created grenades. I mean, those are some of the most dangerous guns ever used. Well, what's interesting is after World War I, and really during, Italy, who was really on the side of Russia because Russia was fighting the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Really, we're going back to World War I here, so we should be looking at this gun, but Russia was fighting the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and it's funny because that was the common enemy of the Italians. So the Italians had a bunch of these really nothing more than hand grenade guns that they didn't really want to have to field. So they kind of were able to help out some allies, I guess by sending some of those Vetterli Carcano rifles over to Russia. Russia gladly took them, which tells you how desperate they were. At one point, Russia declared that they had 1 million men in World War I that didn't have weapons. It was really bad in Russia. So you could think of a gun like this that could have been used in World War I. There could have been 10 guys eyeing the guy that had this gun, waiting for him to get shot so that then they could take this. I mean, it's just, we live in such a privileged society, right, where we don't have to think about some of the horrible things that these people had to go through. That's one of the reasons I appreciate these guns, is they're a reminder of an age that I pray will never happen again. Just a terrible time in humanity's history. But basically, going back to the story about the Made in USSR Vet release, what's interesting is that the Russians got them. The Russians used them in World War I. Then after World War I, the Russians still had some of those Vet release. And they said, well, we don't want this garbage. Oh, but we can use these to help out our friends over in taking part in the Spanish Civil War. So that's how Vetterli Carcanos made it over there, and one reason why you'll see other guns, especially Vetterli, sometimes marked Made in USSR. So really strange part of history that I think is often overlooked in the gun community. So a Spanish Civil War one's pretty cool. Not very common to see. It's definitely worth more than a standard 9130. Right now, it's not worth a ton more, at least here in America. But that could change. If you're looking for an investment that may go up in the future, I'd go for one of these. Really interesting gun. All right, next we're going to be taking a look at our Finnish M39. This is probably the most accurate rifle I have, strangely enough, which is a Mosin of all things. But the easiest way to tell that you're looking at an M39 is you have this semi-pistol grip here, okay? Really, this is really the only Mosin to have this, so if you see this, you know you're looking at an M39. These are becoming quite popular now, and the prices are going up here in America, but these are still fairly common to find. Especially on a website like Gunbroker, you'll always find these for sale pretty much. At least in the year 2021. But again, that could change. So you may find one of these at like a pawn shop or something. Now, right now, these are, in America, these are worth like double what maybe your standard 9130 is worth. And up. Really more than double at this point. It's getting kind of crazy. When these were imported to America, these were like $300, $400 kind of in there. Really, really cheap. They've gone up a lot, right? And the prices will depend. I like talking more relative prices. Like this costs twice as much as that instead of absolute prices. But again, it's going to vary on where you live. Now, I mentioned earlier about antiques. Whenever you get any rifle made in Finland or used in Finland, always take the stock off and check the tang. I'm going to have another video on how to do that, and we'll be taking a look at some dates, but always want to check to see if it's an antique. If it's an antique, it's worth more than if it's not, because that's just a lot cooler. It's really ironic to think that such an accurate rifle, because these can shoot with open sights like 800 yards, no problem, can be legally considered antiques. It's just strange. Again, another weird quirk about Mosins. So this one's a 1943. Again, we see our SA marking there. See that? So we know this was used by Finland. Yeah, again, with these, you really just want to make sure that there's no wrist cracks. That's really one of the big things I look for. If an M39 has a wrist crack, I almost certainly will not buy it. It has to be a really rare year, or, you got to know a lot about M39s to really tell if it's rare or not. But generally, if it has a wrist crack in the stock, just say no, because the stocks for these are not super fun to get. All right. Again, this guy has a bayonet lug. He's got dual sling swivels here. He's got a bayonet lug, so you can put a real bayonet on it, unlike the slide-on ones. that the Mosins had. Ironically, apart from this guy, the bayonets on like the 9130s slid on just like this muzzle brake did. Right? It just goes over the front sight post. Really interesting. All right, so if you see one of these, always look at it, right? If it's really expensive, you may not want to buy it, but if you're really into, you know, the super accurate Mosins, you want something really good shooter, this is one to look for. Now, if that's you, again, going back to what we were looking at earlier, just be sure to check if it's counterboard. Generally, the ones I see aren't counterboard, but if you're buying one of these to be really, really accurate, you know, you may want to go the extra mile to try to find one that has a really nice bore, in nice condition, okay? If you ever want to look at the bore condition, it's really easy. So let's say you're at a pawn shop, and you know, you might want to take a closer look. You're really interested in the gun. You just want to make sure that the barrel's not all rusted out, which you should do on any gun, right? It could be any one of these. It could be a really nice looking one. The barrel could be shot on it. You don't know. So whenever you pick one of these up, if you're able to, you know, just ask whoever, like the owner or whoever has this gun, you know, can I take the bolt out? Because you're going to want to do that to make sure that the bore is in decent condition, right? So you should ask them. If they say no, you know, you may still want to buy the gun. You know, you can try to have like a flashlight. You know, if you can't, you should clear it at least. You could open the bolt, maybe not take it out, but you don't want to stare directly down the muzzle, especially if you know it's not clear. Even if you know it's clear, don't look down the muzzle. That's just a bad habit. You could try to look at it with like a flashlight if you have a flashlight. See if you can see rifling in there or any rust. Because, right, if there's going to be rust, it's probably going to be up here or like in the chamber area. So, again, if they don't let you take the bolt all the way out, it's not a deal breaker. Just as long as you could kind of get a decent idea of the bore. You just want to make sure that it's not like uber pitted, right? There could be rust in it, but it's kind of hard to tell sometimes. That may clean up. But if there's little pits in the rifling, it can actually still be an accurate gun, but you know that may bother some people. So sometimes it's just good to be aware of what you're getting into, right? So you just want to make sure that you look at everything you can before you say and decide, oh, I want to buy this gun, or no, I'm going to wait for another one that I think has a better bore. Okay, the last gun we're looking at here is this 9159. So this looks just like an M38, and let me flip this guy around here. Is actually commonly misunderstood as an M38 because it really does look just like an M38, but it's not. And the easiest way to tell is we look at this rear sight. So first of all, this is a 9130 rear sight base. So this is really long. An M38 is going to have a short sight base like this M44 rifle, okay? So why would a carbine have a 9130 sight base? Well, the short answer is this is actually just a cut down 9130 rifle, okay? And these guns are kind of a mystery. We tend to think these guns came out of Bulgaria from the Cold War. We think that they were desperate to have enough arms during the Cold War for a large populace if they needed to, you know, mobilize a whole bunch of people. And, you know, by the Cold War, really long rifles, even the 9130s up there, were sort of antiquated. They finally realized, oh, wow, we don't really need these super long rifles anymore. So the carbines were kind of a mainstay at that point. The easiest way to tell, though, if you're looking at a 9159, look on top of the sight base. Do you see these grinding marks right here? So 9159s, this is a 9130 that was just cut down. So what they did was they ground down the sight graduations because they only wanted you to shoot this up to really 1,000 meters because it's not intended. They didn't want to mislead people, I guess, into thinking that you could shoot this because ballistically, right, your ballistics are going to be a lot different at really long ranges because you have a shorter barrel with less velocity now, right? So they ground on these. So that's the easiest way to tell you're looking at a 9159. These are quite uncommon. These are like, this is one of the ones that were, and at this point, this is starting to get into Mosins where this isn't necessarily a gun that you can just go buy, right? Even if you have the money to buy one. Some of these guns are just extremely hard to find. So really any Mosin past this in rarity-ish, I guess we could say, it's really not about the money so much as it is just being able to find the thing. Some of these are just really hard to find. Again, it can depend on the market, what year it is, things like that. But you know, you may have to wait a while or look around to find one of these. But this is a really interesting gun. Okay, so what have we learned today? Well, I've wasted nearly an hour of your life looking at a whole bunch of Mosins. So how do we kind of sum this up? If you recall, we were trying to answer the question, what Mosin do you buy in 2021? And I can't answer that question for you, right? So I'm here to help you answer that question for yourself. So it really boils down to what you're looking for. Are you looking for a carbine? So what's cool about carbines? Well, they're short, they're easier to store, they're easier to transport. If you're looking for a truck gun, this is much easier to fit in your truck than like an M91 rifle there, right? These are literally a blast to shoot. These shoot fire out of the barrel because they have a short barrel and they're extremely loud. So if you like that kind of thing, I would go for probably an M44 then. Try to find a good priced one of those. If you just want something really strange and different, then this is a really cool gun, right? If you're into the Cold War kind of a thing, this is a neat Cold War Mosin. Highly recommended. Also, you might notice this is a really glossy finish. This is one of the most beautiful finishes on a Mosin I've seen, and most of them are like this. These are weird. They tend to either have a really nice finish or really used finish, but this is just a beautiful gun. This is one of the prettiest Mosins I've ever seen, just this model in general. So if you're into that kind of a thing, this might be the gun for you. If you're into, you want to shoot, really tight groups at long ranges, you're into the mystique of the White Death and the Finnish snipers and, the Winter War and all of that, or you just like Finland, or, maybe you just want like a really old gun that can shoot really accurately, this is the gun for you. And a Finnish M39 might be a really good buy if you can find one. If you're looking for the absolute cheapest thing you can, right, you may say, Big Sam, this has been a bunch of useless information, and while this is cool, I just want a cheap Mosin. Okay? Well, you may find one of these for really cheap, right? You just got to get out there and see what you can find. But generally, what's cheap is going to be one of these guys, right? And so that's why it's important to kind of look at all the details we looked at earlier where, okay, is it an ex-sniper? What kind of a stock does it have? Does it have anything wrong with the stock? Has the barrel been cut down? If the barrel's been cut down, you don't want to buy the gun. If somebody drilled into the receiver, you don't want to buy the gun, that kind of a thing. And sometimes they can be missing parts, right? So maybe the extractor here, this guy, sometimes they're broken or missing. That's a $20 part. All of the parts on Mosins are really pretty affordable. So, I don't really care about things like that, right? So, in relation to cost of the gun or the stock, this is not a big deal to me. So, if it's missing some pieces, little pieces like that, I don't care. that can all be replaced pretty easily and pretty cheaply. But things like the stock, right, or the barrel or the gun, has it been permanently modified? That's what you want to look out for. And again, if it's an ex-sniper, that's a really cool bonus. You may get lucky and find one. You may look at 100 and that they're not an ex-sniper. It just depends, right? Maybe you can find a Sporterized Mosin for really cheap. Maybe you can find an M9130 where just somebody cut the stock, right? So a lot of sporterizations are just the front part of the stock's gone, and it looks really horrible. But maybe the barrel hasn't been cut down, and they haven't drilled and tapped the receiver or anything like that, and maybe it's really cheap. That's a great buy. That might be a great option for you because you can get into the Mosin game for really cheap. That's a great starter Mosin, and you can just replace the stock whenever you feel like it. You don't even have to, right? You can just leave it like that. Or if you want to get a nice original stock, you can just throw a stock on it, no problem. So if you're looking for an absolute cheapest Mosin, yeah, try to find one where someone cut down the stock, and you try to use that in your favor to talk them down on the price a little bit. Or if you're into World War II, right? Maybe you've played a lot of World War II video games, or they had Mosins. Yeah, definitely get a 9130. These are awesome rifles. They're a lot of fun to shoot. You won't be sad if you get one of these. These are really cool guns. Maybe, though, you're into really old stuff. Maybe you're into the World War I things. Maybe you like from Battlefield 1 if you've played that game. Or you're just into that part of history. This is the one you have to have. You absolutely need to have an M91 rifle. If you're into that kind of era, or just like that old Mystique, it's just a different age from that black powder era we were just coming out of in history. You have to get one of these. I think if you're looking for an investment also, these are good. If you can, let me put it this way, if you can get an M91 for reasonably close to what one of these costs, do it. In the long term, these are going to be worth quite a bit more money than these, because again, these are very common. These are the most common. These are far less common, and really M91s are really underappreciated. So if you want just a cheap Mosin, I wouldn't go for this unless you can somehow manage to find one for cheap. But if you're looking for more of a long-term investment or something historically significant that you can still go out, shoot, and enjoy, this is definitely it for you. One thing to be aware of with these, the stocks, if it has problems, are not easy to find. You pretty much cannot find an M91 stock. You have to look for generally a couple months. Sometimes one will come up on a place like eBay. They are not cheap, though. Just the stock minus the handguard. Here in like America, and today I don't like talk prices, but just to kind of give you an example of what it would cost, about like $200 would maybe get you just a stock, okay? And then the handguard is $100, or $150, so that's like $350, which you can actually, well, in America you can actually pick up one of these for that price, just for the stock and the handguard, right? So these can be quite a bit of more money. These barrel bands are also a lot of money and hard to replace. So this is really starting to get into more for the advanced collector as far as maybe from a budgetary standpoint. But again, it's cool because, you don't have to do it all at once. Maybe you can find a cheap M91 that's got some problems, but maybe it's a really good price. And you just don't want to pass it up. Don't feel bad about buying it because, again, it may take you a while to get some of the parts, but, you don't have to buy them all at once. Don't feel bad about buying a gun then having to wait like 6 months or something to get a new stock for it because, sometimes good things are worth waiting for, and this is definitely one of those things. But it just depends on what you find. All right, so I think that about sums it up. I really hope my rambling was able to help you a little bit in deciphering how exactly do I go about buying my first Mosin and what should I get, what should I look for. If it didn't answer or didn't help you, please let me know in the comments down below, and maybe we'll do a follow-up video, try to answer some of your concerns. But hopefully this was enough to kind of get you started on your trip to buying your first Mosin Nagant. And hopefully it kind of made you want one a little bit more, because again, these are super cool guns. You know, these are really taking off in popularity. So join the Mosin virus movement and pick one up for yourself. Thanks, guys, for watching. I appreciate it. Let me know what you'd like to see next in the comments. Again, shoot me an email anytime you've got any questions about a Mosin, and let me know if y'all got any prayer requests. Thank y'all for watching, and I'll see y'all on the next video.